Hello, everyone. My name is Maureen McDole, and this is episode 36 of Typewriter Talks, which is an online series where we interview Tampa Bay writers and poets. And today we have Mary Chris Bailey, who is a fiction writer, poet, and memoirist. And she happens to be one of our longtime students. And I just wanted to get inside your brain and learn more about you, honestly. Thank you
Sounds like
for being
fun.
Yeah, thank you for being here, Mary Chris.
Oh, no problem. I feel honored. I
Oh,
feel honored.
and you're actually in Maine right
I
now.
am. I
Yeah.
am.
Yeah, she does both Florida and Maine. What a good life. But since COVID hit, she's been in Maine and we miss her, but she's still taking classes with us, which is nice
That's right.
virtual. You
I
know?
suppose that's one advantage of the pandemic is even being in Maine, I still get to participate in the wonderful classes that keep St. Pete lit.
Yeah. So tell us what you're working on right now.
So I call myself a writing dilettante.
Oh,
Um,
I like that.
so right now I've just started a new poem.
Mhm.
I'm working on editing my memoir,
Mm.
and I'm in the midst of writing a dystopian short story.
Ooh, I love it.
So I bounce back and forth depending on my mood of the day.
Yeah, I get it. I think that's a good attitude to have as a writer, because you never know if you're in it's now that you're at the editing phase of your memoir, because when you were taking classes with us, I know you were working on your memoir. So congratulations to be at the editing phase.
Thank you. Thank
That's
you.
exciting. I cannot wait to read it. Um, but I get that, like, depending on your mood, that's kind of how I feel about everything. I am so moody. Like, it's like, what do I feel like doing today? Who do I want to be? Yeah. But jumping around, having that option to, because it's
And it keeps you sort of engaged in different forms.
Mhm.
And like in poetry, over, I don't know why, over the course of the pandemic, I've become obsessed with poetic forms
Mhm.
and, formal forms. And, um, I heard somebody once say, which I think is really true, that sometimes constraints can actually free you.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the case with, formal forms in poetry, because I kind of during the pandemic, because I'm unlike a lot of writers, I think I'm an extrovert. And
Mhm.
so I get my energy and my creativity is fed by others and being around other
Yeah.
people and that connection. And so I was really struggling to get things down on paper. And then I decided to try formal poetry. And that really liberated me to really dig in and start writing some poetry. And then by writing the poetry, then I sort of got into this theme of forms, and I wrote like a magical realism short story, and now I'm writing a dystopian short story. So even in my prose, I'm playing with forms, you know.
And you were a medical doctor,
Correct. Yes.
your previous life, previous.
Yes. In my other life.
So were you writing during that time? Were you always wanting to be a writer? Was it always sitting there, or this is something that kind of
um,
came after that?
yeah, it's funny. Like, I have always written poetry
Mm.
ever since I was a little kid. And poetry has always been sort of my way of um, examining things, maybe understanding things
Yeah.
on a deeper level,
Mhm.
putting things in perspective, even. Um, but in terms of prose writing, I consider myself a relative novice
Yeah.
because I didn't start that until after I retired. Um, During my medical career, because you know I worked at places that were academic, I was required to, do things like write book chapters. I helped edit a textbook. I co-authored some papers and things like that. But, that's very formulaic
Yeah.
writing.
Yeah.
It's not like creative writing at all, and so I really felt like when I first started writing, and the impetus behind my writing was needing to get my memoir on paper. And I felt like I was really bad at it. And and I think I pretty much was pretty bad at it. And then I learned over time through many different venues, but certainly through Keep St. Pete Lit, to understand that writing is a craft.
Yeah.
And it's a craft that, as you work at it and the more you do it, the better you understand it and the better you get at it.
Yeah.
And that was quite a revelation for me because I've always been a diehard reader. And I, had this sort of strange opinion that, writers were somehow magical, right?
We are. Wait, no. We are magical. No, I know what you mean, though. I know.
And so they had this sort of like, they tapped into the creative universe and it just came pouring into them. And although I find that's true oftentimes with poetry, which is probably why you think writers are magical, because you are a magical poet. But, in terms of prose in particular, there's a craft to it.
Yeah.
Something that you have to hone and work on and develop, I guess, is the bottom line.
And when we were workshopping your memoir in Writer's Gym, it's always interesting because we read it out loud and then we get feedback by the people in the room and what different people pick up on and what different people feel. We critique creatively but we also want you to grow and like what somebody might think, I'm missing something here. I need a little bit more here. And what a gift it is to find a group of people, not necessarily just with us, but anywhere that can help you like bring your writing up to the level that it should be.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, one of the things that I have learned is that, I always, in addition, had this image of the writer sitting at a desk and, writing and writing and writing. And then eventually this wonderful work would come to being. And what I've also learned is that no writer works in a vacuum.
Yeah.
And that a good community of writers, developing a good community of writers who can help you see where, like you said, you need to expand or contract what you're saying, is critical to the process of honing your craft, of developing your craft. And I think that's another sort of interesting insight I've had since I started writing creatively.
Yeah, I'm finishing up my third book, and one of our teachers who teaches in all of our schools actually edited it for me. And the number one thing she says is show, don't tell.
Yep.
So I'm seeing this in my own writing, like, oh yeah. And she's like, well, maybe you could use this word differently here, or just take this out. And I was nervous about, when you have somebody new editing and looking at your work. But that number one way of like, can you show me what you mean here more, add this more. And it's really been, and it was funny, after she edited it, I like put it aside for like a month. I was so afraid to see what her critique was and what she said, but it was really just like simple little things like, and it's so helpful. We've had other people on here, journalists especially, like they work in partnership with their editors. They help
Right.
to bring the
Right.
writing even further, as I say, to blossom better. So it's always a gift when you find that, and in a critique group too. But if you find a critique group that doesn't work for you, that you just walk out of there,
Yes,
I've had people that
it's
quit
time to
for
get
years.
out.
Yeah,
It's time
yeah,
to get out of that
yeah.
group.
Get out of that group.
I have been in one group for a while that when I first started going to it, I would walk away from the group and think, okay, I should just burn everything I've ever written and then flush the ashes down the toilet, right? But I kept going to this group because of the fact that I respected the writing of the other people in the group.
Yeah.
And, and it turns out now, I feel, excuse me, that, my writing is approaching the level of the other writers in the group. And so sometimes you do need to expose yourself to trauma to get better at your writing.
Constructive trauma. Let's be clear. Constructive trauma. Like you knew.
Right.
But you knew.
There's nothing vicious or malicious about what these people were doing. It was just that, like I said, when I first started out, my writing really was pretty bad.
Well, I've watched you grow as a writer, and tell us what some of your major themes are.
So in terms of my short stories, I think, some of what I've tried to dig into is sort of human relationships, how we relate to one another within the world, even in, the, dystopian piece that I'm working on and the magical realism piece. When I think about it, everything is really all about, relationships, if you will. In terms of my poetry, I think I mostly sort of work towards understanding emotion and the world and sort of how, we all sort of fit into the world as human beings. So it's a more, I guess, intellectual approach to relationships, but it's the relationship to the universe and reality that I kind of explore in poetry. And in my memoir, I'm really looking at the difficulties involved in having a child with a chronic illness and how that impacts your world as a family, if you will.
Yeah. But I think that that's our job as writers to kind of, there's this quote, Marvin Gaye says that it's the job of any creative, I'm paraphrasing, is to kind of go below the surface of life and kind of bring that up to show mankind behind, to kind of probe beneath just the undercurrents of what is it that makes us human. And that's why I think when art does that, it resonates with you, even though it could be somebody that doesn't speak your language, that's from another culture, that's not even the same age as you, that has had a completely different life experience. But when they're tapping into that same kind of universality, and that doesn't really ever get old, because we're all kind of saying the same stories over and over again. I mean, they're sprinkled in with different
texture, I guess.
Different seasonings, but it's all kind of the same soup.
Yeah.
Primordial soup. We're all,
There are really no new stories in this world, but how they're told.
Mhm.
And, you know, I always look for in anything I read sort of a little aha
Yeah.
moment where you go, oh, yeah, I hadn't thought about it quite that way.
Mhm.
But boy, that's true, you know?
I read this young adult book. I won't name it, but it was well regarded. Like it was the young adult book. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to read this book. And I'm reading this book and I'm like, I'm like, boring. Okay, whatever. But there was one line in it
Yes.
that was like the aha line. And I go, okay,
Okay.
I get
You're
it.
forgiven. You're
I
forgiven.
mean, one line, the whole book that actually like, but it moved me so much that all the other, like, you know, seen that, because I've watched every romantic movie there is, and it's kind of so, and I still don't get tired of them. I do not know why. I mean, it's the same formula. It's like 10 minutes before it's over. Oh, they're breaking up now. They're gonna get it's the
Right.
same formula, but I
And
still
then it's going to be horrible.
I
And
know.
then
And
they'll
then
get back together.
yeah, it's the same. But this book, I remember reading it, and it was like that. Just one line, just rocked my world, and I was just like, so I always keep that in mind. I mean, we don't want to write books that it's, you know, mundane,
they're boring.
just one line, but you know what I mean.
Right. And that's like, you know, I know a lot of people disparage on some level Stephen King because he's a genre writer, but I actually like him for a couple of reasons. One of which, I think he is excellent at sort of understanding and being able to put on paper what it's like to be a child. He can get inside the head of a kid, you know, and in the context of like we all remember, so you have to jump from this rug to that rug and then look under the bed and then hop on the bed at night because, you know, this is the only way the monster's not going to get you on that level. But every book I've ever read of his, in addition, there will be several of those moments of clarity and aha that he pulls into out of to me it feels like nowhere,
Yeah.
you know, that sort of adds depth to his work that I think a lot of people don't recognize.
He's another Maine writer, correct?
He is he's up Banger, Maine.
Well, I mean, if you're living in the middle of nowhere, not that necessarily he is, but you could just, like, I was thinking about that driving to the pool today and having the palm trees on either side of the road, and you know, people come and visit here, but I grew up here in St. Pete, and
Right.
and I grew up in a lot of ways on St. Pete Beach because that's where my grandparents lived, and just how it's so in my consciousness that my landscape should have tree lines with palm trees.
Yes,
You know,
yes.
like how that is paradise, that feeling of paradise is my normal and my default. And it was just this really beautiful, because it's a beautiful day today. We've had some cold weather, but it's like the perfect weather right now. And it's just funny how, I mean, because we're all living our own stories, you know, we're all in our own books right now. We're all in our own poem, writing our own narrative. And it was just like, so my narrative needs palm trees, you know, like.
Yes. I actually was talking about this with some other writer friends this past weekend, how somehow, you know, we were talking about the use of place in writing, right? And one of the writers that I really like is Richard Rousseau, because he can take and make the place a character in the story, right?
Yeah.
And so we were talking about that a little bit, and then we sort of kind of glanced off into the concept that the place where we were born and grew up really forms us and informs our writing to some extent. And you can see that, I think, pretty clearly. There's a certain voice that's regional, you know, like think of Faulkner, you know, he has such a distinct Southern voice
Mm-hmm.
to his writing, or somebody like Willa Cather,
Mm-hmm.
who has a distinct Midwestern voice. And so I think you're absolutely correct that, our environment, particularly our growing up environment,
Mm-hmm.
informs who we are.
Yeah, we just read for our book club, which I highly recommend, West with the Night by Beryl Markham. And if you saw Out of Africa, she's the young aviatrix with I can't think of Dennis Fitch-Hatton in the movie, but it's her biography of being an aviatrix in 1935 Africa. And
Oh, wow.
Ernest Hemingway was like to Maxwell Perkins, who was his editor, goes, this is one of her prose is just like off the chain. But Africa is such a character in that book. And it was funny
Yeah.
when the capital was being invaded, I was reading that book because our book club was that night. And I hadn't slept well the night before. So I was like, I had like 100 pages to go. So I couldn't focus on anything else except like getting this book read. So I was actually in like 1935 Africa, flying with, hunting elephants while the, country, our capital, was being invaded. So I had like a completely different experience of that day than like some of my family members that are like, were traumatized for like a week. And I was like, I was in Africa.
I was in a totally different place.
I was in a totally different world. It's such a beautiful, if you're a memoirist, I really recommend. They do say there is some critique that how much as if it's true, then but just as a woman's perspective of writing that book, and she doesn't include she had multiple lovers. She doesn't include any of the men. It's just it's a beautiful book, West with the Night.
I will definitely put that on my list of things to read.
Yeah. For the sense of place, for memoirists, especially women writers, to read from that lens. It's also a historical novel, and how much how much she was a feminist in so many ways, even in that period of time.
In a time when there weren't really very much activity in terms of feminism, because like all of the people that came before her kind of faded into the background in terms of once the women got the vote, that whole movement sort of faded to some extent. And plus the people that were driving that movement, a lot of those women were quite old and beyond the point where they were energetic enough, I guess, to be rabble rousers. So she was sort of in a quiescent period in terms of feminism, right?
Yeah. And also, it's a beautiful book for travel literature. Like if you're a travel writer, just to describe, because she took the plane from Africa to Britain, and just that experience. And she was the first woman to fly over the Atlantic Ocean from Britain to America. Because the currents, are better to come to
the headwinds are different. Yeah.
And she's up there with no radio for like 18 hours alone in the pitch darkness. It's talk about courage and guts to do things like
absolutely.
It's a wonderful book to read. So I recommend it.
I've definitely, it's on my list now.
Definitely on my list. A couple more questions, because we're like wrap. I love it. But who are some of your favorite writers, and what are you reading right now?
So I know you always ask this question.
Yeah, I love it.
And I was thinking about my favorite writers, and I have to say, as I was thinking about that, I thought, well, there's just so many of them, and if I don't mention some of them, then I'm going to feel like I'm cheating on them.
Oh yeah.
But I will say, so I tried to categorize. So like in terms of literary fiction, I really love Richard Russo and Faulkner. Those are some of my really hardcore favorites. And then I'm, as you know, a big science fiction reader as well.
Yeah.
And in that genre, I enjoy Ursula Le Guin a lot, and Arthur C. Clarke. So science fiction is a weird genre because, on one hand, it's, you can have the really sciencey science fiction, which Arthur C. Clarke represents, like what will the future look like?
Yeah, yeah.
And then you have, using science fiction as allegory, which is more Ursula Le Guin, where she's trying to examine societal issues, but taking it out of context of the time in which she's writing in order to make it more vivid somehow.
Yeah.
Right. And then in terms of like poetry, I love Billy Collins. He's just a hoot. And such a cranky old man. I like him. But then there's also this guy that I discovered, and when I went to the AWP when it was in Tampa, and heard him read a poem, and his name is Sebastian Matthews.
Okay.
And he wrote this poetry book called Beginner's Guide to Surviving a Head-on Collision, which is like a memoir in poetry.
Oh, wow.
And the first poem, and the poem that really kind of I heard him read and really made me love his work, is describing that moment in time when he's in the car with his family, and this older guy in the oncoming lane is having a heart attack and hits them head on, right? And, and describing that instantaneous moment in time where you sort of know what's coming, but you can't process it.
Yeah.
He did a beautiful job in that book, describing that whole traumatic situation. And then everybody loves Mary Oliver, who doesn't, right?
Who doesn't?
So I've cheated on a lot of my favorite authors, but that's kind of a list by genre.
I like it. I like it. I'm going to have to check out Sebastian Matthews, because I'm actually working on a book, a memoirish poem about my family. And I'm not quite sure what the format will be of it, if it'll be just like snippets, little vignettes, or how that will process. The book hasn't quite told me yet, but I know it's not traditional like form poetry. I'm not sure, so I'll have to check that out, because it's
you should. It might give you some insight, at least on how someone else approached the issue of writing a poetic memoir, if you will. It's a memoir in poetry, basically.
Yeah, which is basically what this is. So thank you.
No problem.
So let's do one more question. And usually I ask, like, what advice would you give your younger writer self? And I really want to know. I'm going to ask two questions. That's one of them. Okay. What advice would you give your younger writer self?
Well, I think it kind of harkens back to what we were talking about earlier, in that, writing is not magic. It's a process.
Yeah.
And it is a craft, and you can develop that craft, and don't be afraid. I have always almost worshipped writers, and don't think that just because these people are so amazing that you can't enter that pantheon on some level.
Okay. I like that. And then what would be your holy grail piece of writing advice?
I think the holy grail piece of writing advice, I'm going to sound very repetitive here, but you really need a community of people to help you develop that craft.
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know.
I agree.
I don't think you can do it in isolation, or at
Mhm.
least I couldn't.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree. Okay, let's hear some of your wonderful writing.
So let's see. I'm actually, let me see, I'm going to go to a different view and pull up a piece off the computer. Uh-oh, I didn't lose you, did I?
No, I see you.
Okay. So I'm going to give you a little background on this in order to drop you into where this begins. So this is actually an excerpt of an excerpt. This is an excerpt from a piece that was published in a journal called Please See Me, which is a wonderful journal that tries to open the communication between patients and providers to help inform their understanding. And if you have a chance, I suggest looking at it. Their last issue was about bias, and very interesting. And so this is an excerpt from a piece that they published, and it's also an excerpt from my memoir. And where this piece begins, this is at the moment in time that my husband Wayne and I are bringing our two older sons, Donovan and Sean, in to visit their younger brother, Brian, who's in the pediatric intensive care unit, also called the PICU. After having had at 15 months his third surgery, and in fact, his second experimental surgery, if you will. And initially, Wayne was a little hesitant about bringing the boys in because Brian's still connected to a bunch of machines, and it's a pretty daunting visual. But because no one was sure that Brian was going to survive, I wanted them personally to come in and see him just in case.
Yeah.
And this takes place like probably about a week before Christmas.
Okay.
So here we go. On the day of Donovan's and Sean's visit, Anne, the nurse who was at Brian's bedside most days, was on duty. She had a competent, if brusque manner. Anne was quiet, determined, and never flustered when the changes in Brian's condition told her his hold on life was tenuous. She watched monitors, adjusted pumps, consulted with physicians about these changes, and kept him alive. I trusted her. I was relieved Anne would be the one to guide my boys during their visit because I didn't have the strength to help Donovan and Sean process the experience. Today, she would save me. Anne brought them in separately. Donovan, the oldest, was allowed to see Brian first. Now 6, he had started first grade several months earlier. He walked to Brian's bedside stiffly, shoulders held high, doing his best to be brave. Anne put her arm gently over him and explained the equipment. Donovan, a bright and curious child, looked carefully and thoughtfully at all the machinery attached to his brave baby brother. His shoulders relaxed. PICU beds are kept high so medical personnel don't strain their backs to provide care. Because of this, the level of the mattress was even with Donovan's head. As Donovan examined all the equipment, he avoided looking up at Brian. Anne asked him if he would like to see Brian. Donovan gazed at the floor and nodded. She brought him a stool to the bedside. He climbed up, and for a moment his body stiffened again. Donovan appeared frozen as he stared at his baby brother. Can he talk to me? No, the tube in his throat won't let him, but you can talk to him, Anne said. Exactly what Donovan said, I don't remember, except that he wanted Brian home soon. Santa would bring new toys for Christmas and they'd play together. Several times Donovan reached out to touch Brian, but quickly withdrew his hand until Anne gently placed Donovan's hand over Brian's. He didn't let go until it was time to leave. When Sean was brought into the PICU, he broke into a run to reach my side. At 4, he didn't fully register what was going on with his little brother. Anne put her hand on his chest to slow him down and brought him to Brian, walking side by side. Sean and Brian were especially close. Sean was always patient with his brother's 2-year-old curiosity, even when one of Sean's toys ended up broken because of it. It never seemed to bother him. Sean hopped up on the stool and told Brian all about the latest spaceships he made with Legos. He chatted about our dog, Kipper, and wanted to know when Brian planned on coming home because he missed playing with him. Sean's innocent chatter rent something loose in me. Thick, fat tears wetted my neck and soaked the collar of my blouse. Sean was smiling and happy to be at Brian's side. He didn't understand that we didn't know when and if Brian would be home. Visits over, the 4 of us stood outside the PICU. Donovan was quiet and hugged me fiercely. With Donovan's arms locked around my waist, I bent down to hug Sean. His soft arms encircled my neck, downy hair brushing my cheek. When he pulled me closer, I could smell the tangy scent of his skin as our heads rested against one another. Tell the doctors to make Brian better, Mommy. Love you. Untangling myself from their arms and kissing the tops of their heads, I said, love you both. Wayne gathered the boys to his side and ushered them to the elevator. As the doors slid shut, all 3 waved. More tears escaped the barriers I had erected the day of Brian's surgery. Walking back into the PICU, I rebuilt the rebel wall, enclosing my sorrow stone by stone. That's it.
That's so beautiful. I got verklempt. I was like, I'm gonna cry. Oh gosh, like the role in that, like where you have to be there for him, you have to be there for your husband, you have to be there for your other 2 boys, and then the last is to be there for yourself.
Yeah, it was quite the experience, I will tell you, over the course of time. And
that was so beautiful. I was so in that room. I was so present. Like I could even smell the room. Like I could smell the room and I could feel the temperature of the room. Like that was beautiful. I can't wait to read your book.
oh, thank you. You're so kind.
Oh, Mary Chris, it's been such a pleasure. I miss seeing you
Hi.
in person.
I know. I can't wait. I can't wait. It'll be so wonderful. And I can't wait to see your new digs.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That'll be great.
Oh, it's pretty wild. It's a wild space. We're still figuring out how that works in COVID time with the factory.
Right.
It's
Right. I'm
great having an
sure.
office. Everything is, it's a great
I
community of
know.
people.
I
So
was thinking you are a true grown-up now. You have an
I feel like
office.
a grown up. I really do. I feel, well, kind of. Because I still
Close
look
enough.
at it as a play, I still am listening to my punk rock music in this
Right.
space. Like,
Close enough for government work, right?
that's it. Well, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for tuning in to our latest episodes of Typewriter Talks. We'll be back for episode 37. Wow. We've been doing this since March.
Amazing.
I still, there's so many writers that we haven't even talked to. So it was weekly, but I was like, some weeks I'm not in the mood.
Well, as I said, I've been honored to participate. I have been following these amazing talks since you started them, and I'm so impressed that you came up with the idea, and I have enjoyed them immensely. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, I'm a voyeur, so I wanted to and I'm a writer too. I'm a writer too. So I want to learn the tricks and tips from other writers in our community and get inside their brains too. So it all works out. So thank you so much. And if you want to know more about Keep St. Pete Lit, you can go to keepstpetelit.org. We have writing classes, open mics, book clubs, online classes, all kinds of good stuff. So Mary Chris, again, thank you. And
thank you.
we'll see you all next time.